Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Wad. Hope you guys are all doing well. For the past couple of days, I've been testing out the new PlayStation VR. It's the new headset for the PlayStation 4 as well as the PlayStation 4 Pro. So we're going to basically do a direct comparison between this new PlayStation VR headset and see how it compares against probably two of the most popular VR platforms out there right now. Certainly talking about the Oculus Rift for the PC and the HTC Vive. So we're going to basically take a look at the key differences of what the PlayStation VR has, specifically advantages and the disadvantages that it presents compared to the more higher end PC-based VR platforms. So if you're interested in perhaps finally getting into VR and getting a VR headset, we're going to see how all of these systems compare against each other. So let's get right into it. Now, firstly, we're going to talk about the display that comes on the PlayStation VR and how it compares against the other two platforms. Firstly, the PSVR has a 1920 by 1080 display versus the other two have a 2160 by 1200 native resolution displays. So that means on each eye on the PlayStation VR, you're getting about 960 by 1080 versus the other two platforms, you get 1080 by 1200 on each eye. So that means that the potential resolution and clarity is definitely going to be slightly better on the Rift and indeed the Vive. Additionally, the higher the resolution, the screen door effect that you get on most VR headsets gets greatly reduced as well. Now, ergonomically, all three of these headsets are incredibly well designed. There's definitely a lot of thought and attention to the overall usage and comfort. So you on the PlayStation VR, for example, you have full adjustments for the headband, just like the others, but also adjustments for your glasses. You also find those adjustments on the HTC Vive. The big feature on the Rift is much of the outer external housing is actually made out of fabric, so it actually breathes really well, thereby reducing any kind of fogging that you might have. I didn't really experience any fogging on the other two headsets, but it's nice to know that it does have some nice ventilation. Additionally, all three of these headsets are well below 600 grams, so you can definitely wear them for long periods of time, standing, walking, whatever you're doing, and you definitely won't get fatigued. Now, the type of VR experience that you're going to get on all three of these platforms is a little bit different. The Oculus Rift is primarily a sit-down experience or a stationary standing experience, versus the HTC Vive has obviously the stationary experience as well as full-on room-scale technology where you have the two infrared sensors and you can program a specific play space, and it's definitely the most advanced VR system, specifically when it comes to motion tracking in a live room environment. Now, that being said, the PlayStation VR does have some room scale tracking capabilities with the PlayStation camera. That being said, it's certainly more limited in terms of how much it can actually see, and it's using a little bit more of an inaccurate motion tracking system based on the LED lights on the controllers and the headset itself, versus the other two are using a much more advanced and more precise infrared technology, which seems to be definitely more consistent and a little bit more versatile. Now, probably one of the biggest limitations of the PlayStation VR platform is going to be the fact that currently you're using the old-fashioned PlayStation 4 hardware. And although, based on my experience, the PlayStation did an excellent job of delivering pretty decent overall frame rates with a really good one-to-one motion tracking, and overall response time was actually relatively surprisingly good. I would definitely put it on par with the other two high-end VR platforms. That being said, when it comes to the actual graphics quality itself, if you take a look at fine details in the distance in such games like Drive Club, where you'll see details and cars in the faraway distance are pretty pixelated compared to the stuff that's closer into your relative position. Versus, I think the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift certainly are a little bit more immersive when it comes to more realistic graphics. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind that the PlayStation VR will also have some software and hardware advancements once we get our hands on the new PlayStation Pro, which will obviously beef up some of the graphical capabilities of your general gaming content as well as the VR side of things. Now, moving forward, one of the things that I found to be pretty interesting was the field of view was actually a little bit wider on the PlayStation VR compared to the Rift and the Vive, about 100 degrees, so it felt pretty nice to have that kind of extended field of view versus versus the other two PC-based platforms have around 110 degrees of field of view, which is not bad. The Oculus Rift feels a little bit wider, and the HTC Vive certainly feels a little bit more taller, but that's probably because of the different optics that's installed into each platform. So that being said, the optics on the PlayStation VR is actually pretty outstanding. It's definitely on par with the other two when it comes to overall clarity and sharpness, and it doesn't have any major defects such as chromatic aberration. Now, thankfully, all three of these platforms are using organic LED technology, so the black levels are pretty much infinite, and the color dynamics and rendition are pretty much on par with each other as well. Now, the refresh rate on the PlayStation VR is rated from 90 Hz all the way up to 120 Hz, versus on the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift, you're looking at about 90 Hz on a constant refresh rate. Now, that doesn't mean that the PlayStation is rendering 90 FPS all the time. It does some interpolation tricks based on the current PlayStation 4 hardware, which is actually quite dated and pretty underpowered compared to a moderately powered contemporary PC. PlayStation using a lot of tricks and software to get that frame rate relatively high so you don't have any kind of fatigue or any kind of nausea. And they do actually a really good job of making sure that everything is relatively smooth and there's no motion blur. So in terms of that, I definitely have to give it to them. But in terms of frame rate consistency, is not going to be as consistent and as dynamic and as fluid as experience you're going to get on a high-end custom-built gaming PC. That being said, the PlayStation VR is definitely a acceptable home console VR experience, and you can definitely game with it for extended periods of time, certainly several hours, without getting too much a headache. And it depends upon what kind of content you're playing as well. If you're playing like Eve Valkyrie, which is fairly nausea-inducing in pretty much all three of these platforms, you're going to get a headache and feel a little bit dizzy after, versus if you're playing some kind of puzzle game or any kind of third-person game where the camera's a little bit more stationary, you can certainly game in a VR experience for an extended period of time. Now, when it comes to value and the overall price perspective, the cheapest option is certainly going to be the PSVR. Retails for about under $400. You do need the PlayStation camera, whether that's the first generation or second generation, which is $60 if you don't already have it. And if you do want motion tracking abilities with the Move controllers, you're going to have to buy that as well. And there's obviously a bundle for all that stuff for around $500. Now, the Oculus Rift with the Xbox One controller retails for about $599, and you're looking at just under $800 for the HTC Vive package with all the motion controllers and lighthouse stations and everything. Now, of course, to get a decent PC VR gaming experience, you're going to need a fairly powerful CPU and GPU. Generally speaking, that's going to be above $600 to $700 at a minimum. And to get an optimal PC, you're looking at well over $1,000 to get proper resolution with the higher frame rates at a consistent level. Versus on the PlayStation VR side, you can start out with just the PlayStation 4, which retails for around the $300 mark. And if you want better quality, you can obviously get the professional level of that console, which is going to cost more. But even with the standard PlayStation 4, it is definitely a pretty decent high-end VR gaming experience. I would probably say that if you build a PC for around $500 and $600 for specifically VR, I think you're going to get a fairly similar experience than what you're getting on the PS4, which is a testament to what PlayStation has done to adapt the current technology that they have in their console for a VR-based platform. Now, in terms of actual VR content, all three of these systems offer some pretty compelling experiences, and there's definitely a lot of titles that are cross-compatible with all three of these systems. For me personally, I think the strongest library right now has to be the HTC Vive and actually the PlayStation VR. There's a lot of really nicely ported games, such as Drive Club VR is probably one of the best racing VR experiences I have experienced thus far, even though the graphics are not that good, but I think the the implementation is actually quite well done. Valkyrie is obviously very fun, even though a little bit nausea-inducing. And although Oculus definitely has some cool exclusives available right now, as well as future titles that they're going to come out with, I still think there's nothing really earth-shattering when it comes to a dedicated feature-length presentation with a AAA title. And hopefully that will come in the near future as more and more people buy into these systems, because a lot of games are kind of gimmicky and more or less demo experiences, and hopefully in the future we'll have better, stronger content that will actually make people really get into this whole new VR gaming landscape. But really, other than that, guys, that's really it. Specifically, I think the biggest advantage that the PlayStation VR has definitely has to be price. The biggest disadvantage is going to be the limitations of the hardware and software capabilities of the PlayStation ecosystem. That being said, there's some great content out right now for the PlayStation VR. I had a tremendous amount of fun with it during my days of testing, and I'm going to continue using it throughout the months. And we're definitely going to be interested to see how it actually pairs up against the new PlayStation 4 Professional or Pro console that's coming out very, very soon. So we're going to have an update and a follow-up for this video. Now, how do things stack up against the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift? I think those are certainly more of the higher end enthusiast grade VR based systems, and certainly you're going to need a very powerful PC. And like we mentioned before, the content is king with all these systems. We need killer titles for the people to actually care about putting these contraptions onto their head. We also have a direct comparison between the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. If you haven't watched that video, we'll have a description down below, and also everything we talked about will be in the description down below as well. But other than that, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.